Hey guys, it's Rainy. Welcome to week 11. This week we're going to explore another method of qualitative research, interviews and focus groups. The goal for you is to understand why we use these methods and how to go about using them. Alright, so let's start with interviews. Interviews are one of the big three methods of qualitative research. In qualitative research, a key aspect is that the researcher is the primary instrument. So this means that the researcher is doing the data collection and analysis, pretty much the heavy lifting of interviews. So what exactly are interviews? Interviews are when you ask questions and get answers to discover knowledge. So we do this every day already. So, for example, if our research focus is social media and how students use social media for studying purposes, we would probably go out and ask interviews and find out why and how students use social media for studying and for school, and if it works or if it doesn't. So that would be our question. Just so you know, these little black boxes are going to follow me around throughout the lecture, so just get used to them. You can consider them your best friends because they're my best friends right now. Alright, I want to do an interview. What is the first thing that I should do? How do I start? I'm going to first ask, what am I interested in studying? What research phenomenon am I going into? If we're looking back at the social media and how students use social media for studying, that would be my area of interest. Next, we look at what are our key issues. Alright, we want to know about social media, studying, or if we're looking at marriage and conflict, we try to figure out what our key issues are. And then once we figure out our key issues, this is a good time to decide on the research questions that you're going to be answered during your interviews. I know we've talked about research questions nonstop, but in interviews it's really good to have your research questions before you conduct the interview. Alright, let's look at research questions for a minute. Remember, research questions in qualitative research is going to be open-ended, general, and focus on understanding what the area interests you are. Alright, so after we figure out our research question and the area interest that we're studying, our key issues, we're going to look at how to identify who we're going to interview. So if I want to know about social media, I'm not going to ask my grandma who doesn't have Facebook. I'm going to look more into people who could answer the questions that I'm studying. Let's look at sampling. Sampling is important in all areas of research, but in interviews and focus groups it's a little bit different. You're going to look at First, let's look at the two different types of sampling. You have random sampling, and then you have non-random sampling. Random sampling, to me, is used more in quantitative research. If you want to have a large group, for example, I would go onto ASU's database and email everybody that I can a survey to try to get as many people as I can and try to answer the question that I want to answer. It would be pretty difficult if I'm going to do interviews and use random sampling. For example, if I want to do something about social media and students, I don't want to interview my grandmother. Again, she's not a student, she doesn't use social media that much, or I don't want to use random sampling and get people who aren't students anymore. This is where non-random sampling comes in handy for interview purposes. It's the easiest way to go. Non-random sampling, so it's the easiest and it's most useful. And we have two different types of non-random sampling that I'm going to talk about today. You have convenience and snowball sampling. Okay, I'm going to try to give you guys an example that's not social media and students anymore. Let's look at married couples and their first year of marriage. Alright, if I'm going to try to sample married couples in their first year of marriage, it's going to be really hard to just send out a random group of people and say, here, are you available for this interview about married couples and your first year of marriage? I'm going to get a whole bunch of replies back saying I'm not married, or I've been married for 15 years, and things like that. I'm going to go more towards the convenience or snowball sampling. Let's look at convenience sampling. It's exactly what it says. It's convenient. I'm going to go to my friends that are married and that I've known have been married for just 1 year and they're still in their honeymoon stage, and I'm going to ask them to participate in my interview. So a snowball sample is just like convenient sample. It's exactly what it says in the word. Imagine a snowball rolling down the mountain. You're going to make it larger and larger and larger based from that one little snowball that starts. I have friends who are married, and maybe one friend has been married for a year. They're going to have another friend who's been married for a year, and so on and so forth. And from going from one person to another, I'm going to get a larger group of interviewees just from that one starter couple. All right, there's your update on sampling. Pretty much the main goal is to get the correct participants who can help answer what you want to study. All right, let's look at the next point. How many participants do I need in my study? How many people is it going to take to answer the questions that I want to answer? This is where we look at the new idea, data saturation. So this is whenever the point where no new data emerges. As you conduct your interviews and ask your questions, you're going to get to the point to where you say, I have enough information because my participants keep repeating themselves. Okay, we figured out what we're studying, we've looked at our key issues, created our research questions, found our interviewees through sampling, and we've decided how many we need to have. Now let's talk about types of interviews. The 3 traditional types of interviews are structured, semi-structured, and unstructured. Understanding these types of styles can help you choose if an interview is what you need to answer your question. Sometimes you can start a question and really a survey is better, or doing a statistical analysis is better. But if you understand the structured, semi-structured, and unstructured style of an interview, you can probably decide, hey, an interview is good for me, or maybe in this type of study, I need to do something else, some other type of method. Maybe an ethnography is better. All right, let's start with the structured style. Structured style is like in its name. It's really structured. You're going to prepare your questions ahead of time and ask each participant the exact same question in the exact same order. If a participant starts kind of talking and getting off track, that isn't going to be a structured interview. If you end up not asking a certain question and not asking the same questions to everybody, that's not a structured interview. So an example of a structured interview would probably be like the initial medical interview, like you're in the doctor's office and they ask you all of those questions. They're going to ask everybody those questions. Or let's talk about a phone interview or an internet interview with like the closed options. So if I get an interview on the phone and they ask, how many times do you watch TV per day? It's almost like a survey, but you're using more of your voice to do everything. Structured interviews are good because they're reliable and they're easy to follow and analyze, and you can have other people do them. If you're the researcher, you can maybe have some more help whenever you're doing structured interviews so you can get more data. All right, semi-structured and unstructured are kind of similar. They both are more of a conversation than the structured interview style. You stay away from the yes-no questions and you ask more open-ended questions. You don't want the interview to come to a stop. You want to have more of an easy flow kind of going with your semi-structured and unstructured interview styles. All right, bear with me, guys. This is pretty straightforward, but just go with it. All right, semi-structured is a combination of structured and unstructured. It's pretty flexible, but you're still going to have an interview guide to help you. The structured has an interview guide and it's straightforward and you follow it word for word. In the semi-structured, you have an interview guide, but you can kind of jump around and you don't have to answer every single one of the questions. Let's go back to the first-year married couples. You might find that each couple wants to spend more time on one topic than the other. If I start off the conversation with, tell me how you met, the female is probably going to talk a lot longer than the guy. So, as a primary instrument, the researcher, you should be able to analyze the situation and lead the interview. Semi-structured interviews are good because they allow you to shape the interview and get the answers that you need to answer your questions. All right, unstructured. This generally has no interview guide, and you spend more time with the interviewee. You possibly plan to revisit, and the participants influence their understandings of the subject. So, for example, unstructured is kind of like your ethnographies that you did last week. You're going to go in and you're going to kind of have a general idea of your research question and what you want to discover. And with an unstructured type of interview, you're probably going to go back and you're going to revisit that person. You're going to go and you're going to meet them and start the conversation, start the interview process, and then maybe the next day you're going to go in and the next day you're going to go in until you finally figure out what you need to know. Now we've decided what type of interview we're going to do and that we're going to do an interview. Now let's look at recording procedures. So in interviews, it's important to decide how you will collect your data. In structured interview styles, it might be questionnaires or surveys. Those are pretty straightforward and it's easy to get your recording down. It's easy to get the data that you need. In semi-structured and unstructured, it's probably a good idea to try to audio or video record your interviews. You're going to have to ask permission, but later on it's going to be easier for you to look at the data and figure out what was said. After you do a few interviews, they all kind of go together, and going back and recording them and listening to your recordings are a lot easier. So during your interviews, you're going to want to take notes on the environment and possibly body language to help with analyzing the recording later. You've heard me mention interview guides and protocols. Depending on what type of interview you'll give, the interview guide will adapt to your needs. In this week's module, I posted an interview sample or a template that you guys can look at and kind of get an idea of how to do an interview guide for your assignment. So, an interview guide is a series of questions with prompts and probes to help you with the interview. Like we said, you start off with your research question, and then you're going to go into the interview guide and protocol, and you're going to adapt your research questions to where you can discover your phenomenon. All right, goodbye, red box. Guys, let me be honest. I was really confused when I was making this lecture that my transitions didn't work. So the boxes are kind of trying to help me stay organized, or else I'm going to be all over the board trying to explain the interview guides and protocols and interviewing and sampling. So just bear with me. Alright, so back to the lecture. Most questions are going to come from your research question and your sub-questions. Whenever you start your interview guide, you're going to normally what I do, I'm going to put my research question and my sub-questions at the top. And then I'm going to go from those and create questions that kind of turn my research question into an interview question. Then as you're making your interview guide, you want to think about maybe starting by making the interviewee comfortable. So the first question might be, tell me about yourself. Or if I'm going back to the married couples in the first year of marriage, I'm going to say, how did you meet your spouse? And then going back to your interview guide, at the beginning, you want to start with like an opening statement that's going to say, thank you guys so much for being here, and helping me with my research, and then maybe something kind of explaining what the interview is going to be about. You don't want to tell them everything because they're going to maybe answer the questions the way that you want to hear it and not genuine. So start by saying thank you and then go into making them feel more comfortable. And then your goal in the interview, if you're doing like a semi-structured interview or even an unstructured interview, your goal is to ask open-ended questions that are going to answer your research topic. You don't want to ask yes/no questions or closed-ended questions where it's just one answer and then it doesn't keep the conversation going. In the example that I gave you guys for this week, she uses a lot of prompts and probes. So, for example, whenever you're doing an interview, sometimes the interview is going to go off track. You might start talking about how they met, and then they're going to tell you about their honeymoon, and then they're going to tell you about their friends and their family and all of this other stuff. How are you going to bring it back on topic? What are you going to say that's not too rude and it keeps it comfortable and it keeps it casual? Also, if you do end up asking a yes or no question or a closed-ended question, what is a prompt that you can use to keep the conversation going or to help with the interview and to just bring it back into what you need to talk about? So in your interview guide, you need to have like your opening statement, kind of have a closing statement, just say thank you again for your time. I'll be sure to give you like what I found, something like that. And then keep it open-ended questions. Kind of write a little bit about what questions you're going to ask. And then do your prompts and your probes, like how am I going to keep the conversation on track? What am I going to say? You'll see it in the interview guide that I gave you guys. It's pretty good. Dr. Hayes wrote it, and there's an example of like a semi-structured and a structured. If you're doing an unstructured, you kind of just have an idea and you go out in the field. All right, my red box is back. So here's some interview do's, maybe some tips to help whenever you're going to conduct your interview. I'm going to kind of go over interview don'ts, but pretty much it's just etiquette. Don't be rude. Don't forget to give them a bathroom break. But some interview do's, let's talk about those right now. Pilot testing. All right, after you have your interview guide, you should try it out on someone to see if you're going to get the correct data that you want. And then you can adapt the guide to suit your findings. So in my head, I think that somebody's going to answer the question the way that I want it to. And then whenever I ask, they don't understand what I'm asking. Or I have to ask again, and I have to ask again, and then I realize, okay, maybe I shouldn't ask that type of question, or maybe I should edit this question to where people can understand it easier to keep the conversation going. So this is where pilot testing is a really good idea. Maybe ask your friend or go ahead and do an interview, like an actual interview, and see how well they go. It always sounds better in your head than whenever you say it out loud. I'm pretty good at that. In my head, everything sounds really good. And then whenever it comes out of my mouth, I'm like, whoa, that does not make sense. So, pilot testing. All right, so let's look at setting. With interviews, you want everybody to feel really comfortable. And you want to feel comfortable as well. You don't really do this in a lab or something like that, and you want it to be quiet to where everybody can hear, not a lot of distractions. So the setting, you want to find a good place to have the interview. I mean, that makes sense, right? But you need to have it like predetermined. You need to tell everybody like, hey, we're going to meet here, or tell the person that you're going to interview, and allow time for them to get there. Make sure that they can find the place and that they're comfortable getting there. They're not coming in and they're stressed. Maybe you should meet them. So think of the setting whenever you're going to do the interview. All right, so here's just a list of some other good interview procedures that I've kind of learned along the way, and maybe the book kind of tells me this as well. So stay on task. Stay to the questions, and if it's structured or semi-structured, if it's unstructured, just remember why you're there. And then also stay aware of the time, if possible. These people that you're interviewing, they're there on their own time. unless maybe you're paying them, I don't know. But you want to be considerate of that and of your time as well. If you're recording and you're going, it's like 2 hours long, you're like, wow, you have to analyze all of this and keep, 2 hours is a long time. Maybe you should do 2 hours. But just be aware of the time. If the topic is something that you're interested in, it's hard not to give advice or want to give your input on the topic. So be a good listener, not a speaker. You're here to find the native's point of view, right? That's what interviewing is. You want to see what their perspectives are. Talking about marriage and first year honeymoon period, I've been married for a few years now. And if I'm going in and I'm going to interview newlyweds, I'm not going to give them advice, or I'm not going to tell them about my time. I mean, I might tell them a little bit like, oh yeah, my first year of marriage, da 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 da. But I'm going to be more about a listener. I want to hear their opinions. Not a speaker, but you can speak a little bit. You just have to balance it out. And then make sure you take notes in the interview, not too much to where you're writing more than you're listening and the conversation's not flowing. But you never know if your recorder's going to mess up, if you're going to forget something. So going back to the setting, take notes on this setting. Take notes about what was around your environment. What was the body language of your interviewee? Were they happy? Were they sad? Were they fidgeting? So kind of take notes about that. Like in your interview, whenever you're analyzing later and you're highlighting key points, you could say, like, this person really felt uncomfortable talking about this. Or whenever, if it's a pilot study, you can say, okay, they didn't really feel comfortable talking about this, so maybe I can ask it a different way. Or maybe, is there something else that I can find out to where I don't make them feel uncomfortable? So just record the information. That's pretty much my interview do's. And remember the don'ts. So be on time. You don't want them to get there and have to wait for you. Make sure you have everything prepared. If you want, bring a snack or something. Make sure that you give them bathroom breaks. I'll start talking and then they'll be like, oh, hey, I need to go to the bathroom. I'm like, I'm so sorry. Go ahead and go to the bathroom. Or something like that. Just be conscious that this is a person, and even though you need to do the things, like, just be aware of that. Alright, so I put a few things in your weekly folder or weekly module to help you do the interview process in your assignment. There's an interview protocol that you can kind of use as a template, and then I also put just interview basics. It's just a Word document that's about 1 or 2 pages, and it really, really helps. If you want to read it, if you feel a little bit confused about how to get started on an interview, check that out. And then I have this really cool article that I got recently, and it just shows how somebody did an interview process and what their findings were. And it shows a pretty cool table that explains what they found and how they found it. So check that out, and hopefully that kind of gives you an idea about interviews. Alright, so let's look at focus groups. Okay, focus groups. How are these different than interviews? Well, focus groups are a little bit more formal interviews maybe, or they're informal group interviews. They can be brainstorming sessions or even like field group interviews. So they're like interviews, but they're with groups. So it's a research method where people are interviewed about a specific topic. Alright, so focus groups, like interviews and most qualitative data, they're going to be typically in the interpretive paradigm. It's going to be more descriptive, and it's not as critical as quantitative data. So when and why would you use a focus group? We already looked about when and why you're going to use an interview. So why would we use a focus group instead of an interview? Alright, so let's get rid of my little box, and let's see. So let's look at interaction among interviewees. Interaction between the participants sometimes yields different results. sometimes like one-on-one interviewing can make the participant hesitant. Maybe they don't want to talk about it, but if they have somebody else who brings it up, then they feel more comfortable talking about it, more comfortable bringing it up, saying like, oh, maybe other people feel this way too, so I'm not the only one. So interaction helps a lot. And then also focus groups are able to bring a group of people together to explore topics. You're able to generate insights into topics that are maybe not well understood. So if I'm doing like a focus group on, no wait, let's do this. I was in a focus group recently that talked about good and bad teaching styles, or like good teachers. And some of the things that I thought were really, really bad, and then I heard somebody else tell me that those were really, really bad, I was able to kind of bring other people involved and explore different topics. They would say, oh, I had a teacher who did this. And I was like, I haven't had a teacher who did that yet, but that kind of sounds pretty cool. Or, oh, that sounds awful. I never want to take that teacher. So focus groups kind of bring that into an idea. And then you have something like a group effect. So group effect are when group members interact and new data and insight emerge that previously individual participants probably wouldn't have come up with. So a group effect is whenever somebody will say something, you're like, wow, that's so true. I'd never thought of that. And if I was doing just a one-on-one interview, that participant would have never said that. But because of the group effect, I was able to get more insight and find even more data because of the interaction between the group. Alright, we're almost there, guys. And please don't make fun of me about this slide because it looked really cool whenever I made it, but now it doesn't look that cool and I have red boxes everywhere. So just ignore that and just bear with me a little bit longer. So if you're going to prepare a focus group, I'm going to talk to you about this because in your assignment you have two options. You can either do an interview or you can do a focus group. So let's talk about how you're going to prepare a focus group. So like in the interview, you're going to go to the research focus, like kind of decide what am I going to talk about, right? So you make your research question. You can do a hypothesis, but normally in qualitative research you don't use a hypothesis, you use more like a research question or sub-questions because you don't have a hypothesis normally. Normally in qualitative, you're the first one doing the study. So you're going to do something maybe like how I was talking about teaching styles. What makes a good teacher? That's my research focus. Or going back, is first year marriages, do they have a honeymoon period? Do all first-year marriages have a honeymoon period? So maybe that's my research focus. So you kind of come up with something that you're going to look at. Alright, like with interviews, you have to ask yourself if a focus group is really the best method. Am I going to get the right detail, or am I going to discover what I need to with a focus group? Am I really going to use an ethnography? Would that be better? Would individual interviews be better? Something like that. So you have to ask yourself, is this really what I need to do? Okay, so I've heard many different opinions about this one, but it always comes to having multiple focus groups. Like having more than one group will give you results that you can compare later. So if I'm going to do one group of students, maybe 5, I'm going to divide some students. I'm going to put a group of 5 and a group of 5, and I'm going to ask the same question. What makes a good leader? One group might have different findings than the other group, and I can yield a lot more results looking at 2 different groups than one group, because if one group says one thing and they just kind of keep going with that one thing and the other group says a completely different thing, later on I can compare those and analyze and see maybe they highlighted the same ideas but didn't say the same words or something like that. So then I can ask later what makes a bad leader or teaching styles or something like that and have them keep going with that. So it's sometimes good to have 2 or more focus groups, but in the assignment this week you're only going to use one focus group if that's what you choose to do. So don't stress out thinking you have to do multiple focus groups. You don't have to. So anyway, also you should have at least 5 people in your group, but probably no more than 12. 12 would be way too many, I think. That's just too much. So now let's go into sampling. You need to find your participants. This can be different from interviews. It really just depends on what you're researching. You can maybe put, if you're researching, for example, an ad campaign, you can use a variety of people. If it's what makes a good teacher, you should probably use teachers or students. So it just really depends on what you're looking for. Whenever you do sampling, you can kind of do a random sampling, or you can do non-random, convenient. If I'm going back into married couples and their first year of marriage, I'm probably still going to do either snowball or convenient sampling and just try to get as many people as I can for my focus group. It just depends whenever you're going to do your focus group, how you're going to sample and who your participants are going to be. All right, your setting. Where is it going to take place? Interviews are often in like a natural, comfortable environment, but focus groups can kind of be more in a controlled environment with little distraction. Like maybe you can use a classroom, or you can use just kind of what you find convenient, but it needs to be somewhere where a lot of people can talk and that you can hear everybody and there's no outside noise. Just kind of be conscious about your setting whenever you do a focus group. And then have it predetermined so everybody knows where to go. Like, for example, if you're going to put flyers around saying, hey, focus group at this time, at this day, that would be kind of cool. Just know where it's going to be. Predetermined. There we go. Also, let them go to the bathroom, get water, give them like a break every 30 minutes, or depending on how long it is, just be aware. Like I said with interviews, these are people, not lab animals or something like that. You got to let them do their thing every now and then. All right, anyway, recording. Like interviews, it's important to record. I've been told that video is easier because imagine it's hard to keep track of voices if you do like an audio. If you have 10 people and 5 girls and 5 guys, they're all kind of going to blend and you don't remember, oh, Sally said this and then Amy said that. No, it's going to sound like maybe Sally and Amy kind of sound like the same person. So sometimes video is easier, but if you can't do a video and you have to do voice recording, something that I found is a good idea is to have them say their name at the beginning. That way you have that voice on recording and you can remember, oh, okay, so this is so-and-so. And then that's a good time to get their names in the focus group. So there we go. I always try to record either audio or video, and then make sure you get consent before recording. Just be like, hey guys, do you mind if I record? You don't want to surprise them. Maybe they don't want to be recorded, something like that. So just get consent before you do that. All right, so preparing a focus group, you're going to need a moderator. Either you can be the moderator or somebody else is going to. So a moderator is somebody who leads the focus group and make sure the discussion guide is followed. It can be the researcher or someone who is brought in to help facilitate. Sometimes you'll see like the researcher is just taking notes while the moderator is the one actually conducting the actual focus group. So they need to be able to adapt to the group but keep the discussion going in the right direction. So there's your moderator. Okay, so after you've done 1 through 6, you need to kind of check this out. So your discussion guide or designing your questions. The discussion guide is kind of like the interview protocol. It's more of a program for the focus group. Something that I've heard is kind of like a roadmap. You have your opening statement that maybe introduces the moderator, kind of tells what is going on, says thank you, and then your closing statement says thank you, and that you guys will maybe let them know what you found, and just kind of ends the focus group. So your discussion guide needs to help the moderator, and it needs to help facilitate the discussion. you're going to try to have open-ended questions and make it flexible to where the moderator can kind of say, okay, it's going this way, and maybe they can talk a little bit about that, but still have probes and prompts that help bring it back to what you want to find. You'll probably put your research question and your sub-questions at it so that you know what you're looking for and you don't get confused or lost along the way. But a discussion guide is pretty much necessary in a focus group. That way you know what you're looking for. Okay, so let's just kind of look again. So you need to have your research focus, say what you're going to do, and that's kind of like your discussion guide. And then we're going to go to the number of groups and participants. So you'll check that out, say, okay, I'm going to have 2 focus groups, and I'm going to have this many participants. And then you need to find your location. And then you need to decide about your recording method. What's easier for you to upload later? What's easier for you to do at the time? Do you have access to video recording? Just kind of decide your recording method. And then you conduct the focus group. So there you go, guys. And I feel like I've explained how to kind of prepare for an interview in a focus group and how to conduct the interview in focus group, how to find the participants, how to make the discussion guide and the interview protocol. And I submitted something kind of explaining a background of focus group, and just so you guys can have it in Word, but you still need this lecture for the test purposes and just to kind of help you guys get through the assignment. But one of the last things I want to talk to you about is analyzing the data. Dr. Uzera is going to talk more about this later, but I wanted to give you a small overview to help you understand why we do this. So we've talked about taking notes and recording interviews in focus groups. Normally, after you conduct one of these methods, you then transcribe the data. You put it in a visual format, that way you can find themes and categories and then report what you found. So, for example, during your interview, you're going to do maybe 3 to 5 interviews, and each one kind of keeps saying the same thing, or you say, oh wow, this was different, or you just know what you're finding. And the same with the focus group. So recently I was in the focus group where the moderator asked, what makes a good teacher? We talked about this for 15 minutes about our previous professors and why we liked them. The researcher later contacted us to give the findings that they found, and they said what were the good reasons for a professor that they found from the focus groups. So from all of our stories and different input, this was the main theme that they found, whatever X that they found. Now they can use this towards something else, maybe inform professors that good professors interact more or something like that. So the idea of interviews and focus groups are to gain an understanding of native behavior and opinions and getting answers to discover knowledge. So, for example, I'm not a football player, so if I want to know how social media impacts maybe football recruiting, I would have to conduct an interview or a focus group. So in your assignment this week, it kind of tells you do a research problem, put the research question, show me how you're going to find your samples, and then choose one of the methods. And then you're going to kind of analyze the data, not exactly, but just tell me what you were finding. I don't need you to transcribe all of the interviews word for word from the audio or video, whatever you use, but you're going to say highlight kind of the key points that you noted this week during your method. So hopefully that can kind of help you guys later whenever you decide that you have to do an interview, like a full strung interview, or if you start working for a paper or you work for a PR firm and they ask you to go out and interview and then transcribe and analyze the data, maybe you can use this class as like a starting point or actually get a little bit of field work this week. All right. Well, thanks guys for letting me sit here and lecture you for I have no idea how long already. It was great doing this, and I hope you guys are having a great semester. And please feel free to email me and let me know if you have any questions or concerns about the lecture. I would love to have some input because this is my first lecture that I've done, and I'm a little nervous, and it was something to learn from. Anyway, thank you, and good luck this week.